an inch. One almost wonders.
Mr. Ambassador, Retief said, have you noticed...
However, Ambassador Spradley said, eyeing Retief, a seasoned diplomatist must take these little snubs in stride. In the end... Ah, there, Magnan.
He turned away, talking. Somewhere, a gong clanged. In a moment, the corridor was filled with chattering Yill who moved past the group of terrestrials into the banquet hall. Patoy, the Yill interpreter, came up and raised a hand. Wait here. More Yill filed into the dining room to take their places. A pair of helmeted guards approached, waving the terrestrials back. An immense, gray-jowled Yill waddled to the doors and passed through, followed by more guards. The Chief of State, Retief heard Magnan say. The Admiral Fakau Cow Cow.
I have yet to present my credentials, Ambassador Spradley said. One expects some latitude in the observances of protocol, but I confess...
He wagged his head. The Yill interpreter spoke up. You now will high on your intestines and creep to festive board there. He pointed across the room.
Intestines?
Ambassador Spradley looked about wildly. Mr. Patoy means our stomachs, I wouldn't wonder, Magnan said. He just wants us to lie down and crawl to our seats, Mr. Ambassador.
What the devil are you grinning at, you idiot?
The ambassador snapped. Magnan's face fell. Spradley glanced down at the medals across his paunch.
This is... I've never...
Homage to gods, the interpreter said. Oh, religion, someone said.
Well, if it's a matter of religious beliefs...
The ambassador looked dubiously around. Golly, it's only a couple of 100 feet, Magnan offered. Retief stepped up to Patoy. His Excellency, the Terrestrial Ambassador, will not crawl, he said clearly.
Here, young man, I said nothing.
Not to crawl? The interpreter wore an unreadable Yill expression. It is against our religion, Retief said. Against? We are votaries of the snake goddess, Retief said. It is a sacrilege to crawl. He brushed past the interpreter and marched toward the distant table. The others followed. Puffing, the ambassador came to Retief's side as they approached the dozen empty stools on the far side of the square, opposite the brocaded position of the admirable Fakau Cow Cow.
Mr. Retief, kindly see me after this affair, he hissed. In the meantime, I hope you will restrain any further rash impulses. Let me remind you, I am the chief of mission here.
Magnan came up from behind. Let me add my congratulations, Retief, he said. That was fast thinking.
Are you out of your mind, Magnan? The ambassador barked. I am extremely displeased.
Why, Magnan stuttered. I was speaking sarcastically, of course, Mr. Ambassador. Didn't you notice the kind of shocked little gasp I gave when he did it? The terrestrials took their places, Retief at the end. The table before them was of bare green wood, with an array of shallow pewter dishes. Some of the Yill at the table were in plain gray, others in black. All eyed them silently. There was a constant stir among them, as one or another rose and disappeared, and others sat down. The pipes and reeds were shrilling furiously, and the susurration of Yillian conversation from the other tables rose ever higher in competition. A tall Yill in black was at the ambassador's side now. The nearby Yill fell silent as he began lading a whitish soup into the largest of the bowls before the terrestrial envoy. The interpreter hovered, watching.
That's quite enough,
Ambassador Spradley said as the bowl overflowed. The Yill servant rolled his eyes, dribbled more of the soup into the bowl.
Kindly serve the other members of my staff,
the ambassador said. The interpreter said something in a low voice. The servant moved hesitantly to the next stool and ladled more soup. Retief watched, listening to the whispers around him. The Yill at the table were craning now to watch. The soup ladler was ladling rapidly, rolling his eyes sideways. He came to Retief, reached out with the full ladle for the bowl. "No," Retief said. The ladler hesitated. "None for me," Retief said. The interpreter came up and motioned to the servant, who reached again, ladle brimming. "I don't like it," Retief said, his voice distinct in the sudden hush. He stared at the interpreter, who stared back, then waved the servant away.
"Mr. Retief,"
a voice hissed. Retief looked down the table. The ambassador was leaning forward, glaring at him, his face a mottled crimson.
"I'm warning you, Mr. Retief," he said hoarsely. "I've eaten sheep's eyes in Sudan, Kasway in Burma, 100-year Coog on Mars, and everything else that have been placed before me in the course of my diplomatic career, and by the holy relics of St. Ignatz, you'll do the same."
He snatched up a spoon-like utensil and dipped it into his bowl. "Don't eat that, Mr. Ambassador," Retief said. The ambassador stared, eyes wide. He opened his mouth, guided the spoon toward it. Retief stood, gripped the table under its edge, and heaved. The immense wooden slab rose and tilted, dishes sliding. It crashed to the floor with a ponderous slam. Whitish soup splattered across the terrazzo. A couple of odd bowls rolled across the room. Cries rang out from the Yill, mingling with a strangled yell from Ambassador Spradley. Retief walked past the wild-eyed members of the mission to the sputtering chief. "Mr. Ambassador," he said, "I'd like—"
"You like? I'll break you, you young hoodlum. Do you realize—"
"Please." The interpreter stood at Retief's side.
"My apologies," Ambassador Spradley said, mopping his forehead. "My profound apologies."
"Be quiet," Retief said.
What?
"Don't apologize," Retief said. Patoy was beckoning. "Please, I'll come." Retief turned and followed him. The portion of the table they were ushered to was covered with an embroidered white cloth, set with thin porcelain dishes. The Yill, already seated there, rose, amid babbling, and moved down the table. The black-clad Yill at the end of the table closed ranks to fill the vacant seats. Retief sat down and found Magnan at his side. "What's going on here?" the second secretary said angrily. "They were giving us dog food," Retief said. "I overheard a Yill. They seated us at the bottom of the servants' table." "You mean you know their language?" "I learned it on the way out. Enough, at least." The music burst out with a clangorous fanfare, and a throng of jugglers, dancers, and acrobats poured into the center of the hollow square, frantically juggling, dancing, and backflipping. Black-clad servants swarmed suddenly, heaping mounds of fragrant food on the plates of Yill and terrestrials alike, pouring a pale purple liquor into slender glasses. Retief sampled the Yill food. It was delicious. Conversation was impossible in the din. He watched the gaudy display and ate heartily. Part 3. Retief leaned back, grateful for the lull in the music. The last of the dishes were whisked away and more glasses filled. The exhausted entertainers stopped to pick up the thick square coins the diners threw. Retief sighed. It had been a rare feast. "Retief," Magnan said in the comparative quiet, "what were you saying about dog food as the music came up?" Retief looked at him. "Haven't you noticed the pattern, Mr. Magnan? The series of deliberate affronts?" "Deliberate affronts? Just a minute, Retief. They're uncouth, yes. Crowding into doorways and that sort of thing." He looked at Retief uncertainly. "They herded us into a baggage warehouse at the terminal. They hauled us here in a garbage truck." "Garbage truck?" "Only symbolic, of course. They ushered us in the tradesman's entrance and assigned us cubicles in the servants' wing. Then we were seated with the coolie-class sweepers at the bottom of the table." "You must be... we're the terrestrial delegation. Surely these Yill must realize our power." "Precisely, Mr. Magnan. But..." With a clang of cymbals, the musicians launched a renewed assault. 6 tall, helmeted Yill sprang into the center of the floor and paired off in a wild performance, half dance, half combat. Magnan pulled at Retief's arm, his mouth moving. Retief shook his head. No one could